Good evening. My name is Rose Blaze, and this is a live book show. Welcome this evening. This evening, I have an esteemed guest. I have an esteemed guest called Lee Lawrence, who has written a book, The Louder I Shall Sing. Good evening, Lee. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Rose.
It's wonderful to have you here.
And it's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So, you've written a really compelling book about your mum.
Thank you.
So before we go into the story of what happened with Mum, and I know it was national news in the 1980s, as was, for example, Mark Duggan's, death in recent times. We'll go into it about police brutality and violence. We'll go into that. But initially, I would like you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, I'm Lee Lawrence,
Yes.
and I'm the son of Cherry Gross, who was shot by the police, wrongfully shot, I should say, in 1985, which sparked the Brixton uprising.
Right.
It's famously known as the riots, but I call it an uprising. And I'm one of 6, and I'm the second to last child.
Right.
And at the moment, what do? I run a transport company called Mobility Transport, which provides transportation for people with disabilities. And I'm also the founder of the Cherry Gross Foundation, which I set up in memory of my mum and to allow her legacy to live on.
To live on. Yes, thank you so much for that. Okay, so let me start by asking you, The Louder I Shall Sing. Where did the title come from? What inspired the title of the book?
The Lavi Sifri song, Something So Strong.
Yeah.
And, the song itself resonates with me in terms of that struggle, the apartheid struggle. And that line within the song, because it's a line from in the song, and just before it, there's the part that says, "The more you try to silence my voice, the louder I will sing."
Yeah.
And that within itself, because the story ultimately is about giving a voice, giving a human voice to our story in terms of what happened to us. And it's also about responding to what had happened, because we were suppressed in terms of having a voice. When these things happen, it's the state that take the police to court.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
So therefore you don't necessarily have a voice other than from a perspective of a witness.
Yes, I hear you.
So this is really our response to not being able to have a voice before, to being gagged before.
Yes.
And hopefully I would like to be able to inspire others to find their own voice in their own battles.
That's wonderful. No, that's wonderful, Lee. So, Lee, if you can tell us a little bit about the book, just so the viewers have a synopsis and overview of what the book is about.
So the book essentially is an 11-year-old's account of what happened on that day when my mum was shot.
Yeah.
Also, the book's about Brixton and Brixton as a community.
Yes.
And I wanted to depict a side of Brixton that's not necessarily always spoken about. So Brixton has been this place where people speak about in a very negative way. It's a scary place. You could get robbed, you could get killed, you could get stabbed, and all these horrible things, scary stories that people talk about. But that wasn't my experience. My experience growing up in Brixton was very much like there was that community spirit, where that it takes a village to raise a child attitude there. It was around the Rastafarian movement, so therefore there was a lot of culture and brother and sister, a lot of righteousness. So I grew up around that, and I thought it was important to give people an insight into
And
aspect
you
of
really
Brixton.
did.
Okay, thank
No,
you.
you really did. Because a lot of what you are describing was encapsulated in the marketplace in Brixton. I mean, I don't come from Brixton, but whenever I came to Brixton and I, came out of the station, left, that marketplace just depicted our nation, as, that feel of community spirit, as you've said, being amongst brother to brother. There was a part of our nationality expressed all over the place, Caribbeans, Africans. It was just, it was just all there to see.
Yeah.
It was wonderful. It was really wonderful. Okay, so I know that formerly you lived in another part of London and then moved to Brixton.
Yes.
Right? Okay, so was there a lot of disparity between where you came from and then coming to Brixton?
No, because essentially what we lived in Vauxhall
Right.
before.
Yeah.
And what happened was a lot of people were being moved out of Vauxhall, right? And almost what's happened to Brixton today was happening in that area where
Yeah.
it's becoming more developed.
Yes.
The actual
Gentrified. Yeah.
the actual block we lived in, they were knocking it down. Now there's block of flats there.
Okay.
So therefore, it was almost like this kind of shift, and Brixton was almost like the next. It was like that kind of natural kind of
Progression of
progression.
moving. Yes.
Yeah.
I understand.
And so therefore, it was integrated with not only some of the people that was already in Vauxhall came down to Brixton anyway, but also we were integrated into a community which already existed there that my
Yes.
mum had a connection to anyway.
Anyway, yeah.
So it just felt like, okay, wow, more people like us here.
Yes.
This is more
See
exciting.
yourself represented.
Yes.
I get you. I mean, what I'd read as well was about your family unit. What a really interesting, you could see the rooted family in, within your own family. It was a large family. You all lived together, very close-knit family. Tell us a little bit about your family unit, because that aspect of the story I could relate to as a Caribbean. I could relate to that, So tell us a little bit about family life.
So family life, I mean, we was poor.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
And my mum was struggling, to make sure that she could take care of us,
Yes.
feed us, put clothes on
Yes.
our back. And I saw that struggle.
You did.
And I used to, even as a little child, used to empathize with that struggle. I could feel it.
And that was clear in the book.
Okay.
Denying yourself school dinners because you didn't want to ask her for money she may not have.
Yes.
I felt that, I really did. So from a very young age, you learnt that sense of responsibility, like you said, the empathy, and it was amazing. It was amazing. Okay, so your relationships with your sisters, I know you were very close.
Yeah.
And your dad, that relationship was really interesting. Talk to us about the relationship with your dad.
Well, it was a weird setup, but it was normalized for us.
Yes.
So that's another thing I want to say is that, I know through the book people might think, wow, is that that what life was like? But we quickly normalized it, and we were still fairly happy, even though like that pre the incident.
Yeah.
Even though our setup wasn't like ideal. So my dad used to come every weekend religiously, and Friday stay till Sunday, and then he went to stay back at his house. He lived with his brother and his brother's wife in Brixton, and that was the norm. So I don't remember doing anything with my dad. I don't remember going football, going shopping. He was just in the house. He was just there. He came and he would be there.
I'm present.
Right, and he'd watch his Bonanza and his cricket and the news.
I remember Bonanza.
So
how did that affect you as a parent in terms of your parenting style as you grew older and had children of your own? How would you say that impacted that situation?
Well, all the things I didn't like
Yeah.
in my father and my brother, which were the two really the role models I should have had and been able to look up to.
Your older brother, yeah.
I said I don't want to be, right? So I really tried hard not to become that as a person and as a parent, because I knew how that made me feel, not having them there in that capacity, longing to have my father,
that father figure,
as the relationship with him, longing to have my brother, you know, be that proper big brother that you'd love to have and
exactly.
rely on. So once I was, you know, in terms of my role with my sisters, I made sure as a brother I was there for
Very
them.
close to them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And although I've only got one sister that's younger than me, I am like my older sisters, I'm like their older brother in a sense. That's the relationship that we have because I'm very protective and I've taken that role
And that
quite
was quite
seriously.
apparent in the book too.
Okay.
You're very good at letting us know as a reader what the family dynamics were like.
Yeah.
And you got a sense of that closeness. So let's talk a little bit about that particular day that your world changed. Give us whatever version you like.
Okay. So I was 11 years old.
Yeah.
And I just turned 11. My birthday's in August the 30th. So I was the youngest person in my whole school when I just started school. So it was like 2 weeks into my secondary school experience. And it was a weekend. We would have been up watching telly the night before. And we would have all been in my mum's room and fallen asleep there.
Yeah.
And that particular morning, 7 a.m., 28th of September 1985, I remember it like it was yesterday. There was a noise that disturbed me and woke me out of my sleep. And when I woke up, still half asleep, I wasn't fully awake yet, I saw my mum just walking towards the bedroom door. So I said, okay, whatever it is, mum's going to see what it is. And I laid back down. The next thing I know, I heard another loud, big bang noise this time. And I just jumped up. So I was fully alert, fully awake. And my mum was just on the floor. And this man was standing over her with a gun in his hand. And I just thought, like instantly, I just was raged.
Of course.
And I was screaming and I was shouting. I was saying, what have you done to my mum? If you touch my mum again. And to be honest, my initial reaction was that I wanted to attack this man.
Of course, that's your natural instinctive reaction. Yeah.
So this man was just shouting at my mum, and then I heard my mum in a very faint voice saying, I can't breathe, I can't feel my legs, and
very descriptive.
I think I'm gonna die. And that just that freaked me out even more. And then this man just turned around, pointed his gun at me and said, someone better just shut this fucking kid up. It was almost like I'm annoyed, right?
Yeah.
And in that moment, it was a freeze moment. I thought this man was going to shoot me.
Yeah, oh my God.
So my dad then looked at me and I saw the fear in his face. And I said, wow, like if my dad's scared, this is serious because he's an ex-army man and, you know, he was a security guard at the time. And he just said, Lee, calm down, calm down. And then...
Traumatized.
Exactly. And then, so we got ushered out of the room, and it was only then that I realized that this was police. And there was just guns, dogs. There was about 30 officers in the house. It was just mayhem. They put us all in the living room, and I was joined with the rest of my siblings. So my sister Julia, who was 21 at the time and 6 months pregnant, my sister Sharon, who was 13, and in the room with me, my sister Lisa, who was 8 years old, and my mum was babysitting 2 children. One was aged 7 and the other a 2-year-old. A little while after, the ambulance came, and I remember trying to get back into the bedroom to see if my mum was all right.
You spoke about that, and them refusing you entry.
Yeah. And I broke through,
Yes.
and I saw my mum laying there, and I said, you know, what's happened to my mum? And he said, it's nothing, she just got grazed. And I said, if she only got a graze, why is she bleeding so much? And then he didn't answer me, and he just quickly took me out of the room again. You know, a little while after, my mum went into the ambulance, and I'll never forget, she was going into the ambulance, and she looked at us and just tried to rustle up a wave and a smile to reassure us.
Yes.
Because we were distraught. We was at the window just crying. and so she was gone. My dad was gone in the police car behind her because they wouldn't let him in the ambulance. And we were just left in the house basically with the police.
Yeah, sitting on the couch crying. But I think what really impacted me was the scene where mum is on the floor. She's helpless. She's clearly helpless. And she's looking back at you because you are catatonic. I mean, you're beside yourself at this point. And she's looking back at you as if to say, it's okay, I'm there, I'm all right. So even in that moment, in that acutely devastating and scary moment, her thoughts were about you and how you were reacting to the whole situation. So that must have been traumatic. I don't even know if that's the word to describe. But I mean, I don't know if you want to talk more about how over the years you have managed that, because it's not a regular incident that happened. So how would you describe, I mean, even now reflecting and thinking of that 11-year-old boy, or even 15-year-old boy, 20-year-old man, 30-year-old man, how has this impacted on you emotionally?
So firstly, I want to say,
Yeah, please.
you know, in terms of my mum and how she tried to deal with that situation and still trying to put us first is a testament to her character. She always put us first as her children, and you know, and that's why it had such a huge impact on us, because I always described her as being this lioness that was always looking out for her cubs. So to see that person wounded in front of you was, you know, was horrible.
Yeah.
Right. So the impact of that, I mean, we went back to school 2 weeks later, and I'll never forget the first day I went back to school. There was this my friend Arnie. He just came up to me and said, "Lee, wow, your mum was shot, and there was a riot for her." And he said it in a way like to say, you know, wow, you know, people done something for your mum.
Yeah.
But for me, I just wanted to you know, run. I just wanted to hide.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't want to talk about it.
Yes, of course. You felt exposed, probably.
Yeah, and and that was the only person who mentioned it. So before that and after that, no adult ever asked me, "How do you feel? You know, what happened?"
Was that a good or a bad thing?
It was a bad thing because it meant that there was no outlet for that.
Right. Okay.
We just suppressed how we felt, and it would come out in my behavior.
Okay.
So at school, I remember transforming from this, you know, really shy, you know, timid boy to now becoming the aggressor.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And becoming a bit of a bully, and would have these crazy outbursts in the classroom. You know, if a teacher said anything to me that I didn't like, you know, I'd just get up, I might throw my chair, slam the door, you know, go off in this temper, and it would take me ages to calm down. And I never understood, you know, why I was becoming that. It was just one of these things. And after a while, it became normalized within the school that people knew that, okay, you know, Lee's got a bit of a bad temper. And sometimes that would work in my favor, because then, you know, the other kids wouldn't bother me.
Yes, yes. I mean, the thing about that I find really scary and somewhat even heartbreaking is that none of the adults around you could make that correlation between this really severe acute incident and the change in your behavior, and then progressively or actively do something about it to address it, you know, the psychological impact, the emotional impact, probably counselling support or something. Nothing was mentioned, nothing was organised for you, identified, or anything.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And the officer who shot my mum
Lovelock.
got support. Lovelock.
Oh, he did he?
He did. Straight after, he's in shock, and he's got support, and he's taken time off work. So the person who commits the crime gets support, but the victims of that crime, including my mum, got no support.
No support.
Right? And it was only years later, and I'm talking maybe about 5 years ago, that I had the privilege of speaking to my form tutor. And he was saying to me, I said to him, it felt like nobody knew what happened. You know, no one ever spoke about it. And he said, Lee, when you came back to school, you would have had a sign on your head. Everyone knew who you were. And there were some teachers who just said, I don't want that boy in my class.
Wow.
Because he's going to be a problem. They'd never met you, but they'd made their mind up that they don't want to teach you. So.
But you've never exhibited any bad behaviours before that point.
No, but they obviously knew that
Yeah,
that
the
trauma.
backlash.
Right. So when we're saying, didn't anybody join those dots? They did, but they just decided not to do anything about it, basically.
Oh, wow. 1985. Could you believe? Now, that's a scary concept in the instance that they knew, but it wasn't important enough. You know, then having the bad behaviour, well, that might be seen as expectant, you know, of a black male, wow, well, that actually is. I'm also conscious as well when you said Lovelock got support and attention. Mum didn't get specialist help with her back injury or the being paralysed until sometime after she was in hospital. She had been transferred to a specialist unit. I know before she'd been in hospital for a little while, maybe 6 months or so from what I recall.
Yeah.
And it's after that time, for maybe a year, she was then transferred. So again, it makes you think about the support available to you as a family and how quickly that aid was brought to you as a family. Obviously, with you, that didn't happen. With Mum, it came, but delayed. Dad, your siblings, nothing at all?
No, and even for my mum, I mean, she had rehabilitation.
Yes.
Right, which is really designed to help her to integrate back into society as best as she could.
Yeah.
Right now, having this condition that she was paralyzed as a result of the shooting, but she never had no psychological support. Now, could you imagine? My mum was at her prime. She was 37 when she was shot.
Wow.
Right, she's got these children that she's got to look after.
Yes.
You're the breadwinner. You're the person.
Yes.
The caregiver.
Yes. Always
and
been.
all of a sudden, your life's been turned upside down.
Yes.
And because you were shot when you done nothing wrong, you was at home in the safest place you could be, and then you don't think that person's going to need some emotional support to be able to come to terms with that.
It was overlooked. They just looked after the physical care and.
It wasn't. I don't even think it was overlooked. It was just pure neglect.
Oh my God.
I just feel that nobody felt that it was important enough, that we weren't valued enough.
Right.
To have to get that kind of support.
Right. And I suppose I'm going to now try and just open that up a little bit. Was that because of the social condition? A large family on a council estate. We have limited resources on the NHS. Was it a case of, do you think, Enoch Powell's day when, he was talking about, the Brixton riots and too many immigrants, this is why this is happening, on the backdrop of the Windrush and no blacks, no dogs, no Irishmen, you're not valued enough for us to do anything about this. I mean, what, in your view, was the attitude of those who really didn't show that they cared enough?
So there's the view at the time and there's the view in retrospect and where I sit today. The view at the time is that you don't know what to expect. So everything that you're dealing with is new. So you just happen to deal with the set of circumstances that you're faced with. And it was a bit like being in the jungle and someone just leaves you there and you have to find your way around. In retrospect, it's racism at the core. That we were treated differently because of the color of our skin. We were treated differently because where we so happen to live. So therefore, you're not getting the kind of care and the support that maybe if this was a white family that this happened to, how they would have responded.
Yes.
My mum was already a struggling mum. She was on the radar with social services. So they knew and had a
preconceived prejudice, if you like.
Yeah. And in some senses, because we was on the radar, that should be more of a reason why you step in, because now you know the severe impact this is going to have on this family. But instead, you decided to have a hands-off approach, and nobody wanted to get involved. And it was almost like, the council's saying that the police, that's your responsibility, and the police are saying, well, no, really, it's the council that should have stepped in and intervened at that point. But while you're there arguing about it,
Nobody did anything. You guys were left. And Mum spent the best part of 18 months in hospital.
yeah,
So when she came home, it was having to rehabilitate, not only at home, but to the whole lifestyle, family lifestyle. How was that? What was that like when Mum came home?
it all right. So first of all, we were happy in a funny,
Okay, of
in
course.
a way, because
Mum's back.
you know it was 18 years apart. Sorry, 18
18
months
months. It's
apart.
all right, yeah.
Right, and so therefore this was the moment you've been waiting for.
Yes.
It's almost like, I don't know. I've never been to prison, but I can imagine when someone's doing a sentence and they just keep crossing off the days, right?
Yes,
To
yes.
the day you get out.
To
right?
D-Day, yeah.
So it was almost like that for us.
Yes.
So I never forget that day. We didn't even, we moved from Brixton because my mum had to be in an adapted bungalow.
Yes, yes.
And we hadn't even got furniture yet. All we had was the brand new carpet on the floor.
Yeah.
But we were just so happy to be together again and be reunited.
Yeah.
That didn't matter
Yes.
to us.
I understand.
And it was only, as the days and the weeks and the months went by, that now you're dealing with the reality of
Yes.
the new challenge. It's
Yes.
almost like us living in COVID now.
Yes.
And we're having to deal with this kind of new norm.
Whole new lifestyle.
Right. For us, that's what it was like. We were dealing with this new norm where, mum couldn't do what she could do before. Right. And the roles are reversed. She's no longer the caregiver in the way that she was.
You became the carer.
Right. So now us as children, the three younger children that was living with her are now having to care for mum.
Yes.
Right. So there was a role reverse. And there was a huge sense of responsibility around that too.
Yes, yes.
So it was challenging.
Yeah.
Right?
And Mum became very frustrated one day in the book where she'd shouted at you about making the cup. Well, make the cup of tea then. And you thought, oh, and it probably seemed so out of character, but at that point you were able to really see the frustration in her.
Absolutely. Because the book, there's loads of facets to it, and I thought it was important to allow the reader to understand how something like this impacts every aspect of your life.
Your life.
So it's I use it into the very simple thing. Every day I'd get up as a routine before I go to school. I'd say, "Mum, would you like a cup of tea?" She'd say, "Yeah," and I'd make the cup of tea. And on this particular occasion, she just shouted at me and said, "Why is it every day you got to ask me if I want a cup of tea? Why don't you just bloody well make it?"
Yes, yes.
And for a moment, I had this like, "Oh, I'm just being nice."
Yes, wow, wow.
Right? I was just being polite.
Yeah,
I don't think I
couldn't
deserve
contain.
that.
She couldn't contain.
But when I really sat down and thought about it, I realized it wasn't about me. It wasn't personal. And every day that I was getting up and asking my mum, "Do you want a cup of tea?" I'm reminding her of her disability.
Yes, yes.
I'm reminding her that she
Her
can't actually
limitations.
get up and make it herself. So I
Absolutely.
stopped asking her, and I
Asking her,
just
you
started
just
to
made
put the
it.
cup of tea on the table. But these are the
Wow.
things that it was trial and error. You learn, it was a
Yes.
harsh lesson,
Yes.
but I learned and I understood, and I
Yes.
thought, okay.
And another thing that I really loved that you did, and I thought you were very brave to do, was to talk about the vulnerabilities within the family and what to include in the book, what not to include in the book. You would speak about things that in some ways would expose you as an individual, your lifestyle, your family circumstances. But then in not even retrospect, in thinking about it, really having that in-depth introspection, if you like, you thought, in order for the reader to understand the depth, to gain an insight of what was really happening for my life, and in terms of what then informed my decision making, or enabled me to think or do what happens next. They need to understand what my fears were. They needed to know what my inhibitors were. They needed to understand more about the challenges we faced. So could you talk to us a little bit about the choices in terms of what you include, what you don't include, and why?
So first of all, I'm not only speaking through in my book about myself and my siblings and my family and my mum, I'm representing a whole community.
Right, okay.
So the importance of exposing certain things was to say, these are the set of circumstances that we have to deal with. So for people who don't understand that world and don't understand our culture and don't understand what us as a black community have to go through, there needs to be a sense of exposing yourself to some degree. And in exposing myself, I'm exposing us, because I think it's important to, there is some strength in vulnerability.
Yeah.
But it's something that I had to learn. It was something, even in writing the book, at times I had to really have conversations with myself. Lee, do you want to expose this about yourself? You know,
Yeah,
do you want to expose this about your family?
Okay.
And the process was, at times you had to say, okay, courage over fear,
Yes.
right? Are
Yes.
you not doing this because of fear?
Yes. Yes.
Right? And if it is because of fear and there's a wider objective and a benefit of sharing this, then you got to rise above that.
Yes. Worst case scenario, ego. Can you imagine?
Right. And it was a difficult process.
Yeah.
Because I've spent my whole life living a life protecting that vulnerable side of me.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So to now get to a point where I'm just going to all of a sudden expose the thing that I've been holding, that I've been, it's in like a precious vault somewhere,
Yes.
With a combination on it.
Yes.
All of a sudden that I'm just going to expose that to the world.
Yes.
And how would that be perceived? And a
Yes.
little bit of your ego comes into play, right? But there was something, the one of my mantras is about the purpose outweighing the challenge.
Yes.
So at every checkpoint where I was feeling a little bit nervous about, do I talk about this or not? That was the bit that was the thing that I went through. Okay, is there a higher purpose to doing this?
Yes.
If there isn't, and it's just an expose of my life, then there's no point in that, because there's other aspects of my life that I could have exposed.
Yes.
And gone into in more depth, but I thought there was no point in that. You're just doing that just for the sake of saying this is my life.
Exactly.
Where there's a clear narrative around the story and why I've decided to tell this story. And it's easy for people to look at me today as a finished product to some degree and say, okay, wow, okay, you've come through that, and that's something. But I think it's important for them to understand what I had to overcome, what were those hurdles, for you to really appreciate what my family went through, and the fact that we overcame in the end. To really appreciate that, you need to understand that journey.
Exactly, and who you are today. I mean, in reading different aspects of the book, because I'd always known you as Brandy Lee, the DJ, right? So I'm thinking, no, Rose, it's Lee. No, it's Brandy Lee. No, Rose. And it was really interesting how you spoke in the book about discarding the aliases, getting rid of the AKAs and saying, you know what, I'm not going to hide behind these aliases anymore. I'm Lee Lawrence, and this is who I am. So there was all the vulnerabilities that came with you not having all of these cover shades and just being you. Tell us a little bit about that.
So first of all, I would say my aliases, alter egos, whatever you want to call them.
Alter egos, yeah.
Right? They all played a part, right? And they all still a part of me. Yeah. So there were times when, when I was going through, let's just say, the inquest, and we had to do a petition to try and, get access to legal aid.
Right.
I had to connect to Brandy Lee, the DJ, the MC, the promoter, and really tap into what, Lee, you got to think about this as like, say this is your biggest raid that you're ever going to put on. How do I engage people and get them to hear me and get them engaged in what I'm trying to do?
Right.
So there were times when there was a benefit to those
aliases. Yeah,
right?
definitely.
But ultimately, growing up, I gave those aliases too much power over my authentic self as Lee. And I saw for the first time through going through the case and having to expose myself that there was more power in being my true self
Yeah.
than there was in putting on those capes that I
Right.
thought
Yes.
were giving
Yes,
me
made you
power.
Superman and invincibility and
Yeah.
all of those things. Yeah. I
But
mean, the book, the way in which the book is written, it's written a bit like a fan. So you have these before and after. So alternate chapters were of the past, and then it brought you right forward to the future. The following chapter took us back to the past. The following chapter to the future. So you were able to see both perspectives at the same time, which was interesting. But they were so clearly defined. You weren't confused. You were just evident that you were now back in 1985, because you wanted to make certain points poignant, really clear, so that when you brought us to the present day, we would have a really good understanding of the backdrop relating to either the previous chapter or a previous chapter before.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting in the way the book was put together in that way. So I wanted to say that. But we now come to a part of the book where you're now an adult. And, it has now become your life's purpose to establish exactly the police's perspective on what happened to Mum. So you needed to understand more about what had happened and whose perception, of it am I looking at? Am I going to be investigating? And all the obstacles that you came up against in terms of trying to get that report. You first got an inclination after Mum passed, because I know passing is a much nicer expression for you than died.
Yes.
Right? In Mum's passing, you had, I can't even remember where you'd gone to, whether it was to get the death certificate, and there was a query about a possible inquest. And you were like, what? Which I know is a judiciary process in which you investigate a death, right? But you were like, inquest. And this is where your first inquiry started in terms of, why did we need an inquest? What is it? What is it that I don't know, that I need to know? And it was coming to the understanding that Mum had passed, but it was as a result of her injuries, former injuries, not of natural causes or anything different. And this is when you became even more so determined to know the cause of her passing. And this is where the journey begins.
Yes.
So we're in a place now where you have come through several meetings with the Met, the Met's, legal representatives, and wanting to get to a place where you are able to read this report. So I want you to talk to us. I mean, I could go on, but I want you to now take the lead and talk to us about that process.
So I'd like to take it back
Yeah.
to why I decided to write the book with two timelines.
Right, okay.
Because there's almost two stories. One story is about everything before my mum passed, so the incident leading up to my mum's passing, and then after that pursuit for justice was another journey within
Yes.
itself.
Yes.
And also what we didn't want to do is just clump all of that stuff together, because it was a lot to take in,
Yes,
a lot
it
of
was.
information. So in breaking it up into two timelines,
Yes.
allowed people to get that in, bite
Yes, bite-sized
sizes.
chunks.
Yeah, chunks. So that was the the thinking.
The thinking, yeah.
around
and I
that.
thought it was good because it really was in depth. There was a lot of third-party information. Like I said, like the secondary writer. There was a lot of stuff in there. There were so many layers to the book.
Yeah.
So you were now going to then talk about the investigative part of the journey, where you are now pursuing justice.
Yes, and for me, I thought when my mum passed, I was going to seek revenge, basically, and be looking for this lovelock who shot my mum. But then when the prospect of an inquest came about, I decided to pour all of that energy into this process.
Yes.
And I felt like this was presented to me for a reason.
Right.
So I said, okay, maybe everything up to this point was leading to this point. So now I decided to just throw myself
Focus.
into that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And when we got the report, the internal investigation report, which was concluded, mind you, a year after my mum was shot.
Wow.
But we never saw that document until
20 odd years.
20 odd years, 28,
28,
29 years
yep.
after the incident. So reading that for the very first time and getting an insight into what happened and what led up to it, because it was very detailed.
Right.
You know, you started to identify all the different people that played a part. So where for many years all I had in my head as an image was Lovelock. Now I'm realizing this was a gang. You know, and if you really, when I read it, it was like reading something about a gang. Like, you know, this is what they were like.
Yes.
So you're seeing all these different characters appear, and you're hearing the language that they use to describe us and to describe the area in which we live in, which was, you know, for me, it was just like alien.
Yes.
Right? Hearing them describe where we live, because it was nothing like that. And all the mistakes, you know, some really schoolboy errors, you know, the very basics like, you know, checking the electoral roll on who lived in the house.
Lived in the house.
You know, doing some surveillance around school time to see if there's any children that are going to be in that house.
Yes.
You know, there was just the real basics.
Yeah.
They would have known that who you were looking for is not even in the house. Right? But none of that was done. And instead, they decided to mount this raid upon us like you were going into a war zone. So it was bound to happen. In reading this, you're reading this, understanding. No wonder why my mum was shot.
The way it did. Yes.
And it's you know, it could have been more people that were shot in that house.
Yeah.
In the way that they came in. So it was horrible to read. It was horrible to hear how we were seen, how, you know, my mum was described, how my community was described. And it was just hurtful to know that all of this happened, and one, could have been avoided, and two, it only happened because of your prejudice and your lack of understanding of this community.
Yes.
And who we were as people. We wasn't seen as part of society. You know, we were just seen as, you know,
the underclass, really.
Right. And that these people are just going to be violent.
Yeah.
And they're like animals, and we've got to go in there as hard as we can.
Yes, yes. To contain them. Yes. It was it was really harsh reading, actually. It was really heart-rendering, the whole process where you then started talking about I don't even know if we've skipped a bit or whether we're talking about a secondary report, and I'm trying to recall. But there was a time when you were trying to get the report, the inquest report. Was it the same report?
The same report.
Right, the same report. So let's go back a little bit.
Yeah.
And the journey you had gone through, several meetings with the police, with the Crime Prosecution Services, I presume it was, and their lawyers, and trying to get access to these records, and the difficulty you experienced, and then not being able to get hold of any legal aid, and as you aforementioned, stepping into the alias of Brandy Lee to raise petitions, to raise funds, to apply for legal aid, which was brilliant. But raising, like you said, the profile in terms of the petition so that you'll get exposure, you'd get the media exposure you needed. 130,000 petitions or something. It was mad.
It was.
When you were looking for 10,000. I mean, it was crazy how many times it multiplied. And then you eventually getting hold of the report, and then we coming to a time now when you had your day in court.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to read some, but I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about what that was. I mean, you get a private apology after 28 years, and the public apology 30 years. And even then, this man couldn't look you in the face. Tell us about that day in court, finally.
So I'll go back again.
Oh,
just
please go
slightly.
back. Yeah, let's go back. So much of it.
So the preliminary hearings for the
Yes.
inquest was really daunting. You'll go in and there's, Lovelock, the man who shot my mum, he's been represented by teams of lawyers.
Teams of lawyers.
Metropolitan Police, teams of lawyers.
Wow.
Hertfordshire, teams of lawyers. And
Yes.
you're there, one up, just you.
Yeah, just you.
And you're trying to ask for this document, this report, this internal investigation report, because one, it exists, and
Yeah.
two, it talks about the findings,
Yes.
So the coroner is saying you can't have this document unless you can tell us why you need it. You need to put an argument
Really?
together. And I'm saying, I can't tell you why it's so important until I've read the document.
Yeah.
All I know is I need that document because it's a part of
Yes.
understanding what happened.
What happened? Well, that's understand. That's reason enough, isn't it?
Right. So you're having this sort of back and forth until eventually, the person, one of the members of the legal team of the Metropolitan Police said, clearly Mr. Lawrence is not going to give up until he gets this report. So I'm willing to
Let him have it.
let
Let him
him
read
have
it.
it.
Yeah.
And
Considering the redactions as well.
considering, and that there had to be some redactions, but
Yes.
even with the redactions, it was really damning.
Wow, it's really
And you
clear.
can see why they were trying to hold on to that report with their life, because that was the case.
Yeah.
Everything was built around that report, and that's what gave us the outcome in the end.
Right.
And when we was in the inquest, and Lovelock was the highlight of the inquest. That was the big day.
Yeah.
And he was on the stand for like 2 hours. And our
Wow.
barrister, Dexter, was like, Lee, any questions you want asked, basically your work, I'm here for you, you work through me.
Yes. Yes.
So I remember having my post-it notes,
Yeah.
and I kept writing and giving it to Dexter. And I wanted Lovelock to see that I'm answering you these questions.
Yes.
I've called you
Yes.
here,
Yes.
and I know you're uncomfortable because now the roles have reversed. You're this old frail
Yes.
man,
And I'm a grown virile man.
and I'm a grown man, and you can't even look me in the eye.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But that day
Yeah.
you was towering over me, pointing your
Yes.
gun at me,
Yes.
and telling me to shut the f up. Right.
Wow.
So, and in that moment, I mean, I needed that moment as
Yes.
part of the process.
The healing. Yeah.
Part of that healing process, and I needed that moment also
Justice
to
for me.
realize that all these years my focus was on you, but you know what, in the grand scheme of things, it's not even about you anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, it's about holding this whole establishment accountable for what happened. So it shifted my focus,
Yes.
basically.
Yes. But in such a, I would say in such an effective way, because now, you're holding the force accountable for what had happened. It's not just about a frail old man anymore. It's about the way in which we are treated as a diaspora of people. It's about the way in which the force sees people of colour, because this is how we perceive it as people of colour. So it's really interesting that your focus had shifted, at that point. And of course, as I'd sort of interrupted, and I apologise for that, that it's justice for mum. This is about getting justice for mum. I wanted to read a bit of the book actually about that particular day, when the coroner gave you space to speak. So I think it's about that. And then later I wanted to read, and I just want to check this is the case, I wanted to read about the jury's conclusions as they were read out. Before I do that, can you tell us a little bit about the QC, Dexter, who represented you, and how the way he presented on behalf of the family and the community impacted on you in terms of tools?
So in terms of tools, my lawyer Raju from Bat Murphy, he would say, Lee, your lawyers are your tools. Use us to the best of your ability in that respect. And Dexter was like, like a pit bull. And as far as I was concerned, you know, there was, I didn't want anyone to be nice about this because what happened to us was terrible and no
Yes.
one was nice to us on that day. So I needed someone who was going to represent us in that way to be able to get across how we feel. So that those 2 hours that he was on the stand, Dexter did not let up, right? And you could see this guy was uncomfortable, but he just kept turning up the heat and turning up the heat. So I felt like he represented us in the best way. I don't think, I couldn't ask for anything more. I didn't leave there thinking, Dexter, you could have done more than that. I felt like there was a true representation in terms of, considering the boundaries, right? Because, there are restrictions. There's only so far we can go. But I
Yes.
felt like I had someone who was pushing it
Yes.
as far as he could,
Yes. Yes.
without crossing the line.
Yes, brilliant, brilliant. And when we were speaking earlier, you felt that was a really important point to make because obviously it gave you the courage to really press on.
Yeah.
So, just to say now, the coroner, I wanted to speak about the coroner giving you space to speak. The coroner then gave me the space to speak. If there was anything specifically that I wanted to raise so that the court and the jury could hear what my concerns were and what I wanted from the inquest, this was my moment. Well, I said, the family's concerns are that we were never part of the criminal trial, so the family has never had the opportunity to be involved or to ask any questions around the circumstances which led up to my mum being shot, left paralysed, suffering for 26 years, and then ultimately dying in 2019. We only became aware that the report ever existed at the time of the inquest, and we only laid our eyes on it in October. That was October 2011.
So it should have been,
Yeah.
it should have been, she passed in 2011.
Yes, yes, so it's about that time. This was the first time that we'd been exposed to any information around the details of what led up to my mum being shot. So for us as a family, there were lots of questions that needed to be answered, and we wanted to get down to the truth around the circumstances which led to her being shot on that day. And I could continue, but I'll just skip a little forward because I want to read the other piece, and time is time. I continued. Yes, I'm skipping down a bit. I'd like to say that this incident had a devastating impact on my mum and my family. This was life-changing for us. We've always felt a sense of injustice, and we've had to wait 29 years to finally get questions answered around what happened to my mum and the devastating effects that it had on her and our family. My mum was a loving, strong, determined, independent woman, and she was mine and my family's biggest inspiration. She's the reason why we are here, and I am here, and why I'm here and able to talk. I'm just hoping that this process will be able to give her the acknowledgement that she deserves in terms of what she went through and the circumstances which led up to it. I thought that was a really good synopsis of your journey, really, and what it was that you were fighting for. And I wanted to read the conclusion on page 229. As soon as the jury's conclusion was read out, Dexter was on his feet. It was common knowledge that the shooting of Cherry Gross is a tragedy. It is a tragedy that has starved a family, a community, and a nation. This decision of the jury places on public record after 29 long years the fact that the shooting of this unarmed woman in her house in front of her children was caused or contributed to by a series of serious failures by the Metropolitan Police. What we have established in this courtroom is a vindication of the inquest jury system, because what this case unquestionably demonstrates is that the truth can and must come out, even if it has taken 29 years. The truth matters. And again, that for me kind of concluded in your own words, what that journey was and where it's brought you to now. Lee, thank you so, so much.
Thank you.
For being with us today and for sharing your story with us. And, you know, on behalf of your family and in relation to the community, we could go on and on and on with the interview. But I'm so grateful to you for coming to join us today to tell us your truth. And we hear you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Okay, so audience, thank you, audience, for being with us this evening. The louder I shall sing. Questions at the back pose. What would you do if the people you trusted to uphold the law shot your mother in front of you? Who would you turn to? And how long would you fight for them? This book is a true life story of a very traumatic event in which Lee and his family were left devastated, having to live with the after effects. However, vindication, you know, was sweet, and they were able to get vindication. They were able to get absolute for mum, and I implore you to buy a copy of this book. It's such a well-written book with so much context, layers. I could go on and on. It was an enjoyable read, and it was so articulate and well put together. The Louder I Will Sing by Lee Lawrence. Thank you for joining us this evening, and good night.